So this is going to be a bit of a commenter appreciation night, starting with, I know some of you have made, a handful of people have made suggestions that I show off more different game footage, and that's what I plan on doing here from now on when I do these little like one-off podcasts. You're going to see, because I know not everyone's into Paradox Interactive games as much as I am, I'm going to show off a few of the games from my collection. Opting for more obscure or older titles, but you will occasionally see something you recognize. Ultimately, it's just going to be whatever it is that I feel like playing for 30 minutes to an hour at the time to get the B-roll. Now, my hopes with the comment section for the videos I do, at least the analysis ones, is that it could be a place for discussion. Because I don't expect that all of you are going to agree with everything that I say. Often, several months or several years later, I don't agree with all the things that I say. So I was kind of hoping we'd have a discussion and different questions back and forth, like civilized individuals, because I know that my audience is a little bit more civilized than most of what you encounter on YouTube. That is my belief. But I'd like to shout out someone in particular this evening, someone who was one of my first followers and the most consistent commenter, in fact, someone I've been meaning to shout out for a while, which is someone by the name of The Elder Gamer. If you've looked in my comment sections at all, you've seen this name. He's very, very, very consistent and very interesting individual, I've found. I would say that the Elder Gamer's beliefs are consonant with mine. I don't necessarily agree on everything, but we're kind of in the same lane when it comes to a lot of things. And I got a rather long comment from this person on a recent video, and I'd like to show this off and kind of give my take on some of the things that they had to say. Okay, so here we go. As someone who worked in media starting back in the 1980s and experienced firsthand the success, amalgamation, decline, disruption, demise cycle, I've been suggesting for quite some time that video games were likely to follow a similar trend, but no one has really listened. So we are unquestionably in a state of flux right now as far as our media, entertainment, environment, ecosystem. It's become very obvious, if you've been paying attention at all, that what we have right now is something that is not stable. Forget sustainable. It is not stable. There is no way in hell we can keep this up. I do not believe for a second that in 5 years' time, things are going to look the same as they look right now. I also think that the changes that are coming are going to be very, very hard, if not impossible, to predict, because we are going to have individual actors running all different directions. It's going to be bedlam, and who the hell knows what the internet and the world are going to look like once all of this is shaken out. Now, as far as that applies to video games, the video game market has been stable for quite a while. I think there was a big sea change starting really in about the mid-2010s when we shifted over to the live service model being dominant, and everything has kind of just stalled out since then. There haven't been any major changes to the point where the most popular video games in the world are, for the most part, things that were around during the 2010s. Like, the 2020s have not seen that much introduced to the environment. But we look around, there's no way that we can keep this up. There's no way things are going to remain the same because there are just too many factors that are kind of throwing things into uncertainty. You know, we don't know how much higher budgets are going to go. And we don't know if we're ever going to be in a point where developers can charge more for games, if that's something consumers will accept. And we don't know how much longer consumers will accept the live service model, which is very much what's allowed us to have these gigantic budgets for all these years. We don't know how big the indie markets are going to get and how bloated they're going to get and how that's going to affect things. We don't know how technology is going to affect things, and Elder Gamer mentions AI and all this machine-generated crap, which is absolutely firebombing the mobile market right now. Speaking of which, the mobile market is maturing. We don't know how much longer until that goes into decline. We don't know how much longer until the console market goes into decline. There's just too much we don't know. And as a result, it's become very difficult to predict what's going to come next, but I think everybody knows something has to give. We can't stay where we are forever, and that's just a fact. Continuing, like you, I find the term indie games kind of limiting but not entirely useless. It's an oppositional term in the same way indie music is less a category in and of itself and more that it denotes that it's not Taylor Swift or Beyonce. I'd actually bicker a little bit about that because when you talk about indie music, I lived in like a real indie alti audiophile community for years, and it's a specific sound and you know it when you hear it, but whatever. I think the category is useful as a fuzzy division between AAA gaming and not AAA gaming, but not as a descriptor of what kind of genre something is. I've actually been thinking about this a little bit myself, too. Part of the reason I find it to be such an increasingly useless term is because I'm one of these PC-only types. Don't do consoles, don't do mobile. And on PC, it really has become a very blurry line. Whereas on the consoles, I think it's a more meaningful term. On PC, you can make a pretty good case for the indie market starting to overtake the A-tier market in terms of its size. I'm not entirely sure. Some people have made that argument, but you can make that argument. That's obviously not the case on the consoles, where we kind of know who's ruling and it's not the indies. So I think depending on where you are, depending on what environment you're in, it can be a little bit more meaningful, maybe. But yeah, overall, it's maybe more useful in just the broadest of broad senses to describe kind of overall what we're looking at. Continuing, I see some merit in defining games by whether something is self-published or not, and to a lesser degree by team size. For me, I think insofar as you could ever give an objective definition to the term indie game, I think team size is probably one of the better metrics to go by, but that's just me. Continuing, the line blurs considerably once you get a publisher, especially a notable one, into the mix. Is anything from Hooded Horse or Devolver Digital indie in any real sense? At this point, I'd say mostly no. And you know what? I'm kind of tempted to agree, but a lot of that is from my perspective as a reviewer. Now, I've started sending out my key requests for this year. I have a couple reviews in the pipeline. You're going to start to see them probably starting next week. And when you're contacting a indie developer, the experience you get varies widely. Sometimes I'll just immediately get an email back with a key and nothing else. Sometimes I'll get a key and also a series of instructions. So there'll be an embargo date, there'll be a press kit, there'll be a series of rules. Some developers don't want you to show footage past a certain point in the game or whatever. Sometimes you have to contact someone else, like they're going through a PR firm or whatever. Sometimes they don't say anything. You assume you've been rejected. And then right before the game launches, it turns out they quietly add you to a mailing list and you get a key then. It's just a wide range of experiences. And then you get to Devolver, a company that at this point, I'm not even sure it's worth my time to try and contact them. They angle for way bigger fish than me. You go through this whole process, there's this really long form you have to fill out, and then they ignore me. If I want to review a Devolver game, I pretty much just have to buy it and review it at the same time everyone else does. So yeah, from my perspective, Devolver games kind of don't feel like they're really indie games. I mean, I don't want to gatekeep and make that judgment, but just from this man's perspective, it's a very different experience dealing with them. Continuing. So, for game discovery, maybe the term indie is still somewhat useful, mostly as a way to exclude a particular category, but for analysis, less so. I think the industry will need to start to consider regionality as a classifier. I think an educated consumer might want to search for games from China or South America or Southeast Asia, but I don't know if that shed much light on the relevance of indie beyond recognizing regional variation and what might be considered success in different markets. This is truly global. Especially when it comes to these smaller developers, they are everywhere. When I start to do my surveys, I'm always amazed by how many different countries I end up in contact with. Generally, I end up having to look up like pronunciation guides for all the names I get, and usually I still mangle at least one of them. Yeah, it's just the world we're in right now. We are just no longer in a world that is dominated by Japan and the United States, and that's something worth remembering. Continuing, I've also started to feel like we need more tags for art style beyond pixel and 2D/3D. This has reminded me that I've been meaning to do an article for a while about the very concept of graphics and how It's kind of changed over time. For a long time, we didn't really think about it. And then in the 90s, we had this idea that graphics were this like linear thing and they were objective and we could put a score to it, 0 to 10, and track them. And how that kind of remained true until the 2010s when we began to branch out with different styles. But that'll be content for a different video that's coming, I don't know, a month or 2 or 3 or at some point in the future. Continuing, in the end, I suspect, like other media, we'll mostly have to analyze based largely on budget. We don't have the same expectations for $1 million films as we do for $200 million ones, and ultimately I think that's how the games industry is going to slice it too. I'm not thrilled by the prospect. Art shouldn't be defined by its market value, but until there's a critical mass of people that see games or some games as art, I'm not sure there's much hope for a better way. And this is probably true as well. Now, something I have learned from reading some of my more, let's call them hostile comments, some of my more colorful comments, is there are a lot of people who assume that if they haven't heard of a game, then it can't be any good. Or if a game hasn't sold, 1 million units or hasn't made a lot of money, then it can't be any good, which is the same thought process that most of the bigger gaming publications follow. But there's something tragic about that when it starts to get applied to independent media. This idea that if it hasn't made a ton of money, then it must be bad. Unfortunately, that's just where we are as a culture and as a society. I've had people ask why it is that film box office receipts are public information, because if you're outside of Hollywood, that information means nothing. But to many people, it is important that they know that the movies they like also made a lot of money. People just want to know that they like things that are popular. It's important to people. It's very important to people, and unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with that. It seems to be kind of built into the human condition, and it's just something we've got to learn to deal with when you're talking about independent media. But I just want to remind everyone that part of the joy in being in this space is discovering things you don't know and seeing things that are a little rough and seeing things with that kind of punk rock DIY aesthetic. And I hope if you want to prefer the really popular things, that's fine. But I hope that you can at least learn how to appreciate things that have a bit of a rougher style, that aren't as polished. I hope you can learn to like those things too, because that's a part of this community and it's a part of this world as well. Anyway, I put this up as an example of the kind of comments I really like receiving and that I'd like to see more of. Not necessarily this long. I did kind of pick a longer one on purpose. But even if you have just a small thought about the direction this industry is going and the direction this weird, wild media environment is going, I would love to hear your take. I would love to hear you if you agree with me. And as long as you can be polite about it, I'd love to hear it if you disagree with me. Because I am not here just to have people kiss my ass. If you think I have said something wrong, if you have your own take that is different than mine, leave it in the comments. I want to hear about it. I hope you will stick with me through what is almost certainly going to be a wild year in probably many different ways, and I will see you for the next video.